Hello, and welcome to a first impression sort of review of the new DLC for Ghost of Tsushima, Ghost of Tsushima Legends. This is just going to be a video where I'm talking without a script. I'm just going to talk about what I like, what I dislike, what I think works, what I think doesn't, and it's essentially just a review. Ghost of Tsushima Legends is the free DLC for Ghost of Tsushima that adds co-op mode, new game plus, and a whole other sorts of features. With that out of the way, let's just get into it. First thing first is, what do I like about the DLC? First thing is, obviously, it's free. I really think this is good because it could set maybe not a new precedent, but it sets an example that for the gaming industry, that if you make games good before you worry about profits, profits will come. And you also don't have to pay for extra DLC. And now let's be clear here. Ghost of Tsushima, when they released the game, they already got their target audience. 95% of their target audience had bought the game. What they were doing with this DLC was they were trying to open up to a new target audience, a target audience that wanted multiplayer, a new multiplayer-esque game, a kind of Destiny-esque for that audience, and they can sell their game to that audience even if they're only going to play the Legends mode, which is kind of smart. And it's also not costing the players that already bought the game anything to download it, which is a win-win, and it's not like they're sucking another $30 out of the people that already bought the game and enjoyed it. So the fact that it's free is good. The next up is the class system. The class system, it works really well. There's 4 classes. There is the Samurai, which is like the fighter, warrior, combat, the hack and slash combat focused. The Ranger, which is the ranged combat focused, the bow and arrow combat. The Ronin, which is a support class. It's called a healer, but it's a support class. And then there's the Assassin, which is self-explanatory. It focuses on stealth and stealth attacks. And this doesn't mean that if you're playing the Samurai, you can't use stealth combat. It just means that of the classes you're using, the type of combat that the class specializes in will be enhanced. So the Samurai will have more survivability, more damage in the hand-to-hand, in the hack and slash combat of the game. The Ranger will do more damage and have enhanced ranged attacks. The Assassin will have enhanced stealth and stealth damage. And the Ronin has the base of all these features, but it's the support class. It can heal, it can give damage buffs, damage debuffs, and it's the support. So the classes, they work really, really well. And next up, let's not forget the fact that it is multiplayer. If you've bought Ghost of Tsushima and played through it, platinumed it, however far you gotten into it, you thought of it as not really the game that would be, or most likely you thought of it as a game that doesn't really suit multiplayer well. And you'd be right. Ghost of Tsushima, the main game, does not suit multiplayer well because it's open world. It's built around one single player for all of its encounters. And adding an extra player into that would completely unbalance it, make it too simple, or it would just lead to all sorts of things that could go wrong. However, because Ghost of Tsushima Legends, the multiplayer mode, is in 2 mission types, a linear level-like story mission type, and a survival wave-like mission type, it actually works really well because it's built around, the story missions are built around providing a challenge for 2 players, even though it can be completed by yourself if you are so inclined. And the survival is provided to give enough of a challenge for 4 players, which, if you're really good, I suppose you could complete the survival challenges by yourself. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's possible for sure. So the fact that it's multiplayer is really good. And that kind of that concludes the what I think is really good about the DLC. So let's just go on to the next part, which is basically just going to be a review about some things. The first things up is the gear system. The gear system, it functions. It's a 5-point gear system. There's the sword, the ranged weapon, a charm, and then an assault and a defensive, an attacking and a defensive ghost tool. And each of these can be in different rarities, and they give you different like sub sub stat bonuses, like cooldown reduction or extra just straight up damage or stealth attack damage. And it's not the best it could be. It reminds me a lot of the in recent releases, the Avengers game, uh, the Avengers game gear system. It's not the best it could be, but it functions. It works. It's not the main thing that the DLC is about, so I don't have too many complaints about it. I have one major problem with it, but we'll get to that. So yeah, the gear system, it functions. Something else about the gear system is with the new, it does limit you. For example, you can only have one ranged weapon at a time, so you can only have a half bow or a blowgun or something like that. Which it makes sense why they would do so, because having four people with all of these different types of weapons would break how combat's supposed to work. And it's also a reason why they limited the amount. It's, in my opinion, or why I would think they limited the amounts of ghost tools you can have. Because if you had more than two, you could do all sorts of crazy combos with your friends. And it's also a reason that they have changed it from a consumable based system to a cooldown based system for the multiplayer. Because if it was consumable based and you had four people with kunai, with 3 kunai each, you could just throw all 12 at a group of enemies and they would die, and that's not how kunai are supposed to work. So the changes to the gear system, the gear system could be better, but I think the changes work well and they are necessary. And so up next is the story missions. The story comes in a 9 mission parts, and each mission has 3 chapters. I'm gonna try not to get into too many spoilers, but if I do, I'll let you know. Each mission is built for 2 players. Like I said previously, each mission is built for 2 players. The missions themselves aren't that much of a challenge, at least on the first playthrough, and the story itself can be quite engaging. It's nowhere near as engaging as the actual main storyline of Ghost of Tsushima, but for the DLC, it's engaging enough to keep you playing if you're playing alone, or if you actually care about that sort of story and we're just playing it because you want more gameplay. A slight minor spoilers going into here. There isn't really any main characters. There is one main enemy who, this is the real spoiler part, you never actually meet face to face, but that's neither here nor there. The story itself it's decent, it's engaging. I wouldn't call it the best work of this team, but it's still a decent enough story. And it works with the theme of Ghost of Tsushima Legends, of it being more of a Legends, I guess, as it is narrated through a storyteller's perspective, kind of like how the Mythic Tales quests were in the base game. It feels like you're playing through the Mythic Tale before Jin goes off on the quest. So yeah, the story it's serviceable. It's good. It's even good in some places, but it's nothing to write home about. The story missions, they each have about every 1 or 2 has a gimmick, sort of gimmick. Like the first mission has, again, minor spoilers here, a gimmick where there are things called linked enemies, where basically if you kill one but don't kill the other, after a certain amount of time, the first one that you did kill will come back to life. And that's just, it's a gimmick. Every single mission has a different type of one of those. I'm not going to spoil the rest of them, because some of them even work really well. I think they work in a way to change up the flow of combat and make it not just how it is in the base game, and to add another layer, another thing you have to think about, especially since there's supposed to be multiple players in this in the story missions. It gives an extra form of challenge, so that you're not just constantly having two players rush through an entire set of enemies. One more thing is customization. There is a good amount of it, though a lot of it is tied to having done things in the main story. So, especially masks for most of the classes. So, if you haven't done too much in the main story, you're not going to have access to that many masks. So that's just that's also something to think about. But the customization, there's a lot of it. Some of the some of the more rare custom outfits look really, really cool, but they're much harder to get. And that's another thing, is there is no microtransactions for anything. You have to earn everything that you want to get, even if it's cosmetic, through doing challenges or just racking up the time in the game. So yeah, there is a good amount of customization. Not as much as I would like to see if it was a paid DLC, but it's not. So it's actually quite a good amount. And I think that's about it for the actual review section. Now to get on to the problems I have with it. The biggest problem I have with the DLC is the fact that, at least at the very beginning, you are only gain access to one combat stance. And here's why I think that's a problem. Because in the game Ghost of Tsushima, the main game, switching between stances is a main core part of combat, and it makes it so where you can actually beat your enemies and not have to just swing your sword against their guard and watch it slowly chip away, or just basically play defensively and try to parry and then hit them and kill them before you even break their guard at all. It allows you to switch your stance and break their guard much faster. This is not the case in Legends. Being able to switch stances is tied to what sword you have, and a common sword and a uncommon sword only have one stance. There's stone swords, water swords, wind swords, and moon swords. And if they're common or uncommon, you only have access to that stance. If it's rare, you have access to the stance that is given to you by the sword and another stance. If it's epic, you have that plus two other stances, and if it's a legendary sword, you have access to all the stances. I think this is a mistake because it's essentially requiring you to to try to get a legendary sword to be able to use the full extent of the combat system. And I think the combat system should be available to the full extent from the very beginning, as it very much takes away from a core mechanic that made the combat so enjoyable and so feel like you can master it, instead of it just being budget Sekiro combat, where it's just parry attack, and try to break the guard meter so you can do damage to their health. And so I definitely think that they should have not done that and just left it in as it was. And they could have kept the same sword system with stone swords and the water swords, but just have, for example, attacks in that stance do more damage, or hit harder, or have it do an effect, or have have a new combo available, or something along those lines. I feel like they could have done something better than just simply limiting the stances you can use in combat to one or two in the very beginning of the game. So that's my biggest complaint. Something else is some of the enemies they seem a bit unfair. There is one enemy type that it is almost impossible to not get hit by, unless you are playing very, very precisely, or you're going to use a lot of your resources to kill it before it can hit you. It is unfortunate that this is a type of enemy that you see in this DLC, but it's only one enemy that does this, and you'll know it when you see it if you play. But that's another problem I have. And yeah, I think those are the only two problems I have with the game, or with the DLC. So overall, I would rate this as one of the better DLCs I've ever played. It's incredible. It's a lot of content, especially for a free DLC for players that already own the game. It is an insane amount of new content, and it adds replayability, which is the one thing I thought that Ghost of Tsushima was lacking. Sure, It also adds New Game Plus, which also adds that sort of replayability, but because it's only the same story that you're running through over and over again, doing the same tasks and missions, the multiplayer adds that new sense of replayability. The like how you would play a multiplayer game over and over and over again with a different match every time because it is multiplayer. So I think it gives Ghost of Tsushima that, which was one of the big things it was missing. Yeah, I would rate this as probably a good 8 out of 10. It falls short in some places, but all in all, it's a very good experience from my first about 5 hours with it. I'm excited to play more of it, and I can't wait to maybe talk about it again. Yeah, this has been fun. But that's going to be it for this. I guess I'll see y'all later.